You can take a flower, roll it up and make it fine. Sprinkle it with knowledge and a little bit of time. Cover it with headlines and a sweet euphoria too. Cannabis man, cannabis man, cannabis man. Spreading news and joy across the land. Diving deep into the growing green. Cannabis man, we're all king.
Hello, and welcome into another episode of the Cannabis Man podcast. Thank you so much for clicking on the show. I am your host, Don Kleppen, and if it's your first time here, welcome in. This is a show where we're trying to take a more journalistic look at all things cannabis. I like to bring information to you about the plant. I'm a broadcaster in Chicago. You can hear me on the radio, and I've been a personal cannabis user of almost 20 years, which goes well back before the days of legalization. I've got a lot of memories of meeting sketchy people in parking lots that maybe I never met before, but I got someone's number from somebody I met at a party, and then you're waiting at some dark basketball court late at night hoping that somebody shows up with a bag of something that will make you feel the way you want to feel. And I know that sounds crazy to those people who have started consuming cannabis in the age of legalization that we're in, but that's the reality of where my experience started and came from. So when I talk to people and I say on the show that I'm happy to be in this place and whatever the problems with legalization are, I will die on the hill that it's a lot better than the black market days. You know what I'm talking about if you experienced those. But on this show, I like to speak with people in the space and bring you perspective, news stories. I'll share with you any local news. I'm here in Chicago, Illinois, but I also talk about stuff going on across the United States and around the world as well, because the cannabis legalization, the green frontier, as I call it, has expanded state by state. It's now in half the country, recreationally in 24 or 25 states and 38 for medical purposes. And other countries around the world have started to legalize cannabis as well. And I know that there is a thirst out there for people to learn more about this plant as the legalization moves forward. And I know that because listeners from 85 countries have tuned in to this little show that I started 3 years ago, and I really can't thank you enough for checking it out. And this has been listed by Listen Notes as a top 10% podcast in the world. There are over 3.5 million officially registered podcasts, and others say there might be a lot more than that. So to be in the top 10% makes me feel pretty good. Other platforms like Good Pods have listed this as a number 1 indie news podcast and a cannabis one, and top 5 for society and culture. So I feel very, very grateful that this show that I started has resonated with so many people, and I can't thank you enough for listening. If you haven't already, I'd appreciate it if you could leave a rating or review for the show. Keep listening by all means. You don't have to do it now, but by the end of this episode, if you like what I brought, if you enjoyed the conversation I had with the expert, which is what I like to do here, speak with people in the space, not just to give you my perspective and run through news headlines, but also give you the perspective of somebody who's an expert in the space, like an entrepreneur or a politician who is elected or appointed to make rules in legal spaces, doctors, researchers who are working in a lab to kind of make more knowledge known about the plant, answer questions we have, or actual medical doctors who are treating people with medical cannabis, and other journalists in the space covering this. I speak with all of them here on the Cannabis Man podcast, and I bring those conversations to you. So if you like that and you like this one, after the episode, do me a favor and leave a rating or review on whichever platform you're listening to this. However many stars you think it's worth, review it. Any comment that comes to your mind when you think about what you heard here, all of that helps me stand out from those millions of podcasts I just mentioned, and it lets others know that this show is worth their time. And if you've already done that, thanks a lot. My expert interview today is with somebody in a different arm of the cannabis business who I don't normally speak with a lot, but I thought it was extremely important to bring you their perspective. This is someone who works in the financial side of cannabis. They run NewLake Capital Partners, and the financial side for any business operators in it will tell you it is a critical side. It's not something that a lot of people like to talk about. It's not one of major public interest like the headlines and like the products and stuff like that. But if you have an idea for a cannabis business, or you've already started it, but you're trying to get things up off the ground, like you need to get real estate, you need to get a physical location for your store or your business, or you need access to capital, you need a financial backer in your corner. Some people are lucky enough to have those connections. A lot of people who enter the space don't. And so that is part of why I wanted to bring to you my conversation with Anthony Caniglio today of NewLake Capital. We talk about a lot of things, his journey into cannabis, work he started with investment banks, and since selling a business in 2017, a friend pointed him toward cannabis when he was looking for his next venture, and he found that it was a space that was criminally underserved, doing research. And then he talked about identifying the need of cannabis companies to have a real estate partner in their business. And he also speaks about that company's real estate portfolio, along with how understanding the cannabis sector makes them stand out. And it's not just him and his research that gives them that expertise. He has some people on the board of NewLake Capital that have been in cannabis for a long while, and they've got the perspective of multi-state operators, so they know the difficulties that you might face as a business, and they know the ins and outs of what you need equipment-wise and how to serve the cannabis consumers out there. Also talks about last year's Federal Reserve interest rate cut, which you may recall happened in, I believe it was August or September. It was definitely Q3 or Q4 of last year, but he speaks specifically about the benefits for cannabis companies as well as the public at large. And then we talk about the potential impact of rescheduling. Now, Anthony and I sat down back in November. It was just after the election. It was like November 11th. So we were looking ahead when the rescheduling hearing was still set for this month of January. I'm recording this episode January 29th, and you and I both know sitting here now that that administrative hearing has been pushed 3 months at minimum. So we know that rescheduling isn't happening anytime soon. But I didn't cut it out of the interview because Anthony talks about a lot of stuff that may happen for businesses, for politicians, and just the public at large if and when rescheduling does happen. And it's not really concerning any particular timeline. We do talk about some of the states that voted on cannabis in last year's elections and look ahead to some of the moves that some of those states are making now in this year of 2025. I also do have a sort of roundup of some news stories for you, a couple of them here in Illinois, but most of them elsewhere in the country. There was a large study, the largest study ever done on cannabis and brain function and working memory. So I'll tell you what they found out. There's also a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit, a few of them, right here in Illinois, that accuse cannabis companies of harming consumers. I'll tell you what that's all about. But then on the other side, in terms of benefits to consumers, there have been a lot of reporting about this. But then on the other side, on the flip side of positives for consumers, you've heard me talk a lot about alcohol sales dropping where cannabis is legalized. It's not just alcohol. There is another significant medication, prescriptions anyway, that have plummeted in states with legal cannabis programs. I will tell you about those as well. And then there's a fun new experience in the Chicago area having to do and offering cannabis products. So I'll get to all of that and more. Stick around for this episode of the Cannabis Man Podcast.
This is Tommy Chong, and you're listening to the Cannabis broadcast.
Yeah, alrighty, and welcome back in, listener. I like playing that original opening to the show. I know I have my theme song at the beginning, which everybody says is very catchy. I hope you enjoy that. But then I kind of give my soft opening, little introduction as to what you can expect in the episodes. And then the theme you just heard was the original opener to this show, written and composed by my friend Yusu Kim, aka Good Son, who recently became a father back in November, and I congratulated Yusu and his wife Joanna. Little Colby is absolutely beautiful, seems very precious, and obviously Violet has brought so much joy into the house for Gretchen and I over these past 9 months, and I'm just thrilled that my buddy is getting to experience the highs and lows of fatherhood now as well. But speaking of highs and lows, it has been a very low January for me. If you haven't heard any recent episodes, I've been doing a dry January, a sort of modified version of it. And there was Violet right now. I hope you don't mind. I know she's made her way into some past recordings. There's sometimes not much I can do editing-wise, and my wife and I we all live in a one-bedroom condo here in Chicago. We're going to be moving later this year in June, but my recording space doesn't have a lot of separation from our living space in general, so I hope you don't mind sometimes the occasional infant squeal or scream or shriek, all these babblings that she's been doing. It's been very entertaining around our house. But back to that dry January, what I do is I abstain from alcohol like most, but then I also take the opportunity for a tolerance break. I do a tea break for the whole month of January. I also do no caffeine and no added sugars. And I'm sitting here right now. I've lost 13 pounds for the month. I do exercise most days, even when I'm not doing like a dry January. That's just part of my routine. But during this month, I'm usually down in the gym every day, so that certainly helps with the weight loss. I also make sure and meditate for at least 10 minutes after the workout, and I do some cold showers for about 3 minutes before my regular shower, which is something I started a few years ago. I just found that it puts me in an interesting place. It sort of resets my brain settings. It's really difficult, as you can imagine, but 3 minutes is doable, and then the way I feel after the cold shower is a lot like after I feel after a workout and stuff, and after the meditation. It's just, I feel refreshed, invigorated, and kind of ready for the day. So all of those things, along with journaling and drinking a lot of tea. I mean, an uncomfortable amount of tea. Like the amount of tea bags that are just in our garbage these days, it's insane. I'm drinking like 4 or 5 mugs like every day. I've got some Tea-Chino, which replaces my morning coffee. If you are not familiar with the show, I love combining coffee and cannabis. The Caffeinabis mixture is one of my favorites, and I've been missing that a lot, both of those this month. And I am so looking forward to this weekend. I said I'm recording this the 29th, so tomorrow's the 30th and Friday the 31st, and then Saturday's February 1st, and oh baby, the party is going to start early, and the weekend is going to be full of partying, because I've got a lot of products that I have been waiting for to try, just sitting on the sidelines. My wife and I have a lot of plans in terms of how we're going to spend the weekend, and I've got some ways that I have been really keeping my eye on indulging after the month was over as a reward for the arduous task of getting through the 31 days without any of the substances on which I normally lean. But that morning tea that I replace my coffee with is called Tea-Chino, and I'm recording this in the afternoon, but even so, I've got some Tea-Chino right here. It's kind of one nice thing about it is that I don't have to cut myself off of Tea-Chino at any point throughout the day. Caffeine-free, acid-free, it's gluten-free and vegan-friendly and all of those things. But this flavor is Snickerdoodle from their holiday blend. Nice and sweet, puts you in mind of a gingerbread house. Not too sweet, though, and all of the Tea-Chinos and all the other teas I've been drinking are very subtle tasting, especially compared to coffee. There's no kick in the pants of the caffeine, which I normally love. But at night, if you have listened to this before, you know that I lean on cannabis a lot to help me get to sleep at night. That was one of the major things that turned me onto it in the first place. Well, during these dry months, I lean on sleepy time or bedtime tea. That's something I'll brew a mug for my wife, and I both have some around like 9:30 or 10 o'clock, and within half an hour, 40 minutes, it's a lot easier to go down. And my dreams this month, I experience this with every tolerance break I take, but any cannabis user who's done a tea break knows your dreams get vivid. Maybe it's different for you. And if it is, let me know. You can text me down below in the description notes. Click on the Text Cannabis Man link. But for me and a lot of other cannabis enthusiasts I know, there is a relationship between cannabis and REM sleep. Some people say it suppresses REM. The jury is out on that. As much as we know about cannabis, that's one of those areas that is still in need of study, and the specific connection between the two is not well understood. But there is no question there's a relation between REM sleep and cannabis. And when I'm using cannabis, I don't remember my dreams. If I have them, I wake up without any kind of lingering memory of what took place during the night in my mind. That is not the case during this dry January. Every night is like watching a movie. It is a vivid dream, and I can remember bits and pieces that kind of stick around and linger during the following day. I don't really have a problem with it because my dreams haven't been unpleasant, though, any of them, even if they're not unpleasant, they can still have like haunting elements to them. They can still have things that just make you scratch your head. You wake up and you're like, well, where the hell did that come from? Why did I have dog legs? There's these random little bits that you just pick up throughout the day, and the information that's stored, whatever. What dreams come from those things are wild. And as a regular cannabis user, I go a lot of my life without those dreams. And so for the month-long tea break and these vivid dreams I've been having, it's really a reminder, a strong reminder of what dreams can be like. And so if you do take a tea break, if you haven't before, if you're thinking about it, want to experiment with one, that's something to expect. Expect that the first few days it's going to be tough to get to sleep. Lean on some sleepy time teas. The reason I do my dry January this way is because I find that combining all of those abstinences somehow makes it easier for me to do. Only cutting out cannabis somehow is more difficult for me than cutting out alcohol and caffeine and sugars along with it. If I consume alcohol, it's much more likely I'm going to smoke. So that's a part of where those two came in. Cutting out caffeine was part of trying to help me get to sleep at night. And I find that continues. It's the same with the added sugars. Less sugar throughout the day, it's less of a stimulant. So finding sleep at night is not as difficult. Then you add the morning exercise, the meditation, the journaling, the sleepy time teas. All of it is really a sort of cohesive effort to make sleeping easier at night without the cannabis that I prefer as my sleep aid. Anyway, all of that little tangent just to say that I am speaking to you now with only 2 days left of January after tonight, and I am so looking forward to Saturday. I'm right there. I am right there. I can see the finish line. It is fast approaching. And boy, I can't wait to talk to you from the other side. It is going to be such a good weekend. And I hope you have one too. Right now, let me get into the News Joint Wrap. This is a wrap-up of news stories and events in Illinois, brought to you by IllinoisNewsJoint.com. And let me tell you first about an event that is coming up in Chicago. It is an inaugural event where brands meet buyers at a high-vibe, consumption-friendly trade show put on by Flower Expo, Illinois. This is running Saturday, March 25th, 12 to 10 p.m. at Saraband, Chicago. And you can get a 20% discount at the link at IllinoisNewsJoint.com for general admission passes. You can use the code NewsJoint20 to unlock that, or use the link that I have included below in the description notes. But that sounds like a lot of fun. A lot of brands are going to be there. I highly encourage people to get to cannabis events wherever you are. That more and more of them are coming out now, and it's a great opportunity to meet some people behind the brands that maybe you've heard of. It's a great time to try some new products. They've always got their best stuff at these shows, and it's just a fun vibe. It's just a great time. People usually bring their best. They dress well, and there's a lot of cool people around, whether they're entrepreneurs, business owners, whether they're marketers or, media people covering it. It's just a fun place to be. And so that Flower Expo Illinois event in March is one to get to if you can. Aside from that, a few reviews that Illinois News Joint has offered recently include Space Rainbow by Corner Boys, Hawaiian Rain, X Permanent Marker by Flora, and Watermelon and Green Apple Suckers by I Got the Munchies. What a great company name that is. It's more of a statement than a company name. I got the munchies. It's a declaration, and one that I think many of us can relate to. I have certainly felt that statement, and I can't wait to say it truthfully again very soon. But anyway, you can find out more about all of those things that I just mentioned at IllinoisNewsJoint.com. And before I get into the product of the week that I have tried, I want to mention another elevated experience that you can soon take part in. You may have heard of the concert venue, the Salt Shed. This used to be, exactly as the name suggests, just a shed, a giant one that you could see from the Kennedy Expressway as you're driving into or out of downtown. You would see a big shed to the east of the interstate, and it was just a salt storage facility. Well, now that has been converted into a concert space. I haven't been yet myself, but I hear the acoustics are great. They have had some really compelling shows there over the last year since this has been operational. And now, concert goers at the Salt Shed can catch a buzz in a different way. Green Thumb Industries, GTI, as you may have known them, a big multi-state operator, and the corporate arm behind the Rise dispensary chain. They are opening a new retail shop inside the Salt Shed that will sell hemp-derived THC Delta-9 products like candies and drinks. A quote from Green Thumb, a spokesperson says the space will sell Farm Bill compliant hemp-derived D9 products, including Incredibles gummies and chocolates, Bebo gummies, Senorita THC margaritas, and exclusive merchandise. And let me just say, those Incredibles gummies and chocolates are great, and the Bebo gummies are fantastic. You might have heard me talk about them during the Best in Grass competition for Illinois. They won one of those Best in Grass awards. I had the Cloud-9 sparkling pear flavor, I believe. Those are fantastic. Haven't tried the Senorita THC margaritas, though. I look forward to trying those one time, and I love that a concert venue, especially a new one, is now going to offer some of these THC products. Quibble about the hemp versus the cannabis, whatever, but the hemp allows a little bit more flexibility. And again, Farm Bill compliant, which I've talked a lot about the 2018 Farm Bill that effectively legalized cannabis across the country up to 0.3% THC. So if you're not familiar with that, check out some of my past episodes where I go into it. But this is called Rise at the Salt Shed. So if you go there for a concert, look for the Rise sign. And you can go in there, grab yourself some drinks or gummies, and God, what goes better with a concert than those? I just cannot wait. I'm going to be looking for a show that I want to get there. This is on the fairgrounds between the Shed and the Chicago River. So it may be outside of the actual concert venue, but when you're in that area, outside where you've parked or where you've gotten into after you've checked your ticket and all of that, look for the Rise and go get yourself some D9 hemp products and enjoy the show. I'm certainly looking forward to enjoying a show there myself very soon. But for now, let me tell you about some products that I've been enjoying. I have mentioned several times already, this has been a dry January for me, so these are not cannabis-infused products that I'm talking about here. These are non-infused. But I spoke with the CEO of Lahua Brands, Violet remembers. I spoke with the CEO of Lahua Brands last year, Sierra Elena, and there are several brands underneath the umbrella of that overarching company name. One of them is Voila, which is a fantastic name. I think it's fun, an exclamation point right at the end there. They sell cannabis-infused sparkling mineral water, and Sierra was kind enough to send over some, again, non-infused samples, so I just got to kind of taste the flavor of this. This was watermelon in particular, and if you get an infused sample, it's 10 milligrams of THC and 5 of CBD. But the best part, aside from the infusion, obviously, 0 calories, 0 sugar, 0 carbs, 0 worries, as it says right on the can. I split this with my wife, Gretchen. We shared the watermelon can here. It's a 12-ounce can, and I found the watermelon taste to be very subtle. But the mineral water itself was incredibly refreshing. And I can only imagine that with the infusion, something like this with the 0 calories and 0 sugars, no carbs and all of that, I think more and more people are looking for stuff like this. Whether you're watching your weight, whether you're trying to stay healthy, or you're just looking for a drink that is not going to kind of, keep you up at the end of the night. You're trying to catch a buzz, but a lot of alcoholic cocktails, we know, they have sugar, even margaritas and all of that. They have these things. So getting a drink that'll offer you a social buzz without any of those is fantastic. And like I said, for this Voila watermelon, I tasted it was mostly clean, refreshing water. Not bubbly. Mineral water is still, so it's not carbonated. But it was I had it out of the fridge. It was very nice. In the evening after dinner, just a refreshing glass of water to pound. And imagining that with an infusion of THC and CBD, I loved it. Sierra also sent over a different brand of theirs, Refresh. Now, their Refresh products are really interesting. These are 2 fluid ounces. They're basically shots. They come in little glass bottles. Again, non-infused sample for me, but 60 milliliters of different drinks in a shot form. And the little glass bottle has a safety cap that you have to push down and turn. This flavor of Refresh that I got is fruit punch. And I actually hadn't tried it yet. I decided to save it to share it with you. So, just cracked it open. Refresh Fruit Punch, a live product sampling, courtesy of Lahua Brands and Refresh. Cheers to you, and cheers to the end of dry January, very soon. Oh, that is nice. Okay. Took down the full shot there. Very nice, very subtle. Again, not overpowering in the least. I would say it tastes a little bit like an iced tea version of fruit punch. Or if you ever had one of those Arizona iced tea cans, the 99-cent big boys, but less sweet than that. This is vegan and gluten-free, and I have to imagine there's not a nutrition label on this the way that there are some facts on the watermelon Voila can, but I have to imagine this is sugar-free as well. It certainly doesn't taste like there's any carbs in there. It doesn't taste like there's sugar, but there is a very pleasant fruity sweetness that hits you right away and there's a little bit of an aftertaste, kind of like a fruit-flavored gum that you might chew on. So again, very subtle, nothing overpowering, and it's already fading nicely. But just like the Voila, very refreshing, had it right out of the fridge. And what's nice about this sweetness is, when you drink like a soda or like some of those juices or even brisk iced tea, something with a lot of sugar in it, it starts to kind of dry your tongue out and like squeeze the sides of your mouth because it just has that stimulant of all the sugar and all of that. There's none of that here. It is very much more of a water-based product. And so therefore, both of these, the Voila and the Refresh, both are absolutely refreshing, very clean, very nice to have. They will put you in a nice vibe. And like I said, trying the infused samples, which I know they have in California. So if you're in Cali right now, look for Lahua Brands, look for Voila, look for Refresh, and tell me what you think. Hit me at the text line below. But for my money, having stuff like this, as I've said, just a refreshing drink option that's infused but is not sugary and is not going to come with all of these negatives like a lot of alcoholic drinks do, or even non-alcoholic drinks, like I said, those iced teas, sweet drinks, soft drinks, as we say. A lot of them come with their own headaches as well. And I think that you'll find both of these brands to be well-crafted and offering not much more than some refreshment without a lot of lingering after effects. Listener, welcome back. My guest today is doing some important work in the field of legal cannabis. I talk about the green frontier and how it's moving all the time and how it's changing every single day. Well, earlier this year, there was some activity from the Federal Reserve regarding interest rates. Now, this is something that has to do greatly with legal cannabis, and it's something that we don't, talk in detail a lot about on the show, but it's really important in in terms of business owners and people who are wanting to start a business, or if you have one already, the whole notion of getting capital, getting access to it, loans from banks, whichever state you're doing cannabis operations in, they all have their own laws. You know, I talk all the time on the show about how each state is kind of like its own island in terms of cannabis laws. Well, the Federal Reserve did something that affects all states who have legalized cannabis, and that is that they lowered interest rates earlier this year. And obviously, at this point, we've had an election. 2025 and beyond has a lot of unanswered questions, not only in terms of what the party in charge will do with cannabis, but also how the rescheduling hearing is going to go and all of the implications with that. But no matter how any of those things go, the finance part of starting a cannabis business, it's uniform in terms of its importance to all cannabis entrepreneurs and people operating in the space. And so a large company that is operating in this space is NewLake Capital Partners, Inc. And I thought today we would speak with the president and chief executive officer of NewLake Capital, and that would be Anthony Caniglio. Welcome, Anthony. Thanks for jumping on today.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here with you.
My pleasure. And so, like I said, you know, the finance part of cannabis businesses, finance, it's the lifeblood for all businesses, but, you know, cannabis in this weird state, sort of legal in many states and federally still prohibited, it throws up a lot of roadblocks and obstacles for business owners and people trying to create it. And finance is the lifeblood of those, just like any other business. But before we jump into NewLake and the finance part of it, tell us a little about yourself and how you found yourself in the cannabis space here.
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me. So for me, I've been out of school now for 35 years. I say that and I can't believe it, but I started my career at Pricewaterhouse. I was an auditor, focused on banks and asset managers and real estate companies. And over the course of my career, spent my time after being at Pricewaterhouse, at various investment banks, having and leading different investment banking businesses, generally always focused on the finance company or specialty finance sector. I left JP Morgan back in 2011 to start up a residential mortgage company that we grew and scaled nationally, and then ultimately sold that in 2017-18. And what we were really what I was looking for my next step in my career back in 2018 was an industry that was underserved, an industry that had some unique dynamics that would allow a focus on customer service, allow a focus on creativity, allow a focus on relationship building to differentiate yourself and be able to scale up that business. And so I had a friend point me to the cannabis space. I definitely had some hesitation at first, given my background and how we all had grown up through the 70s and 80s hearing about the war on drugs. But I really spent a lot of time focusing on the background of it, and I did a lot of research, only to be, quite frankly, a little embarrassed by what I had allowed myself to be talked into or to believe. And so I embraced the opportunity wholehearted in the end of 18. We started our business in early 2019, and today we're the second largest owner of cannabis real estate in the United States. So it's been a fun ride.
Wow, that's crazy, Anthony. I mean, your journey is definitely, I know it'll resonate with a lot of people listening. There's so many people who, all of us, I talk about on the show all the time, the stigma, the lingering stigma from last centuries. You mentioned the war on drugs, that DARE education that I got to when I went into school, and the police officer came up and showed us the video of the scrambled eggs and was like, hey, this is just your brain on drugs. And all of those people who meant well, and just kind of took the direction from the authorities above and gave their instruction to us to avoid things like cannabis. I think all of us took that at face value. And even though these people weren't malicious, they were looking out for our best interests, I think, but they were just simply ignorant of cannabis on their own. And so, like I said, they took the direction from the authorities, and that left all of us to just do the experimentation on our own, and that led to a lot of people having bad times and whatnot. But by absolutely, there are so many people who have come to see the light, as you described, after just kind of doing a little more research, whether it was trying it out for themselves and having a good experience, or just somebody that they cared about, whose opinion they valued, sort of pointing them in the right direction. And in terms of the finance part of this, you mentioned you're in it from 2018, starting in 2019. And NewLake Capital has obviously done some really great work in that time to become the second largest, real estate holder for cannabis in that time. That's really amazing. When you were sort of looking for your next, foray after you sold that last company, and you were sort of figuring out, doing your research into cannabis and seeing it, what was it about let's say the industry at large, not just the prohibition and the propaganda, about cannabis itself, but in terms of the finances, in terms of investors, cannabis, it's been a really hard business to invest in terms of returns and the regular sort of approach to it because of its strange legal status. So I guess just, talk about, from you as a finance guy, talk about what you saw back in 2018 and 19 when you were first starting to look in this industry.
Yeah, there were a couple of really key dynamics that were at play. One was the state-federal disconnect and how Section 856 of the Controlled Substances Act limits a landlord's ability to knowingly rent or lease to somebody operating in the cannabis sector. So we knew that there was a wide swath of real estate that just wasn't available to the industry, and that a specialized or an organization that was specialized in providing real estate capital to the industry that could be organized from the outset to understand those limitations and those differences between state and federal law would be somewhat unique to all of the other real estate capital providers that are out there, whether they be publicly traded REITs, whether they be private real estate funds or local landlords. What we also realized is that cannabis in most states you have to buy it at a dispensary. So we knew there was specialized real estate for the retail side of it, but we also understood that as cannabis legalization was rolling eastward, more and more states were taking a limited license approach, and more cannabis was being grown indoors in these more sophisticated cultivation facilities, and that is highly intensive from a capital perspective. And we know that if you're a cannabis company, or quite frankly, any manufacturer or product development company in any industry, you really don't want to utilize your shareholders' capital to put it in or invest it into a hard asset like real estate. And so we always understood that from a capital efficiency perspective, these cannabis companies weren't built or shouldn't be built to be large holders of real estate. And so they need a real estate partner, in our opinion. And that's what we saw as the opportunity to step in, provide a very professionalized approach to providing that real estate capital, which was somewhat unique. There were only a couple of really professionalized platforms out there in 2018 when we were getting our business organized. But what we also saw was that this wasn't just a real estate business. We understood from the outset that it really took a complement of skill sets in order to get that done. And that's where I drew upon my years and years of running businesses in various different business segments, because I always took that approach to say, we're not smart, we're just a smarter team. And so here we were able to bring in people with expertise that we thought was important to assemble a quality portfolio of cannabis real estate. And importantly around that, it is understanding the cannabis business. And so one of the first people I talked to, and is a director today, is Pete Cadence. He was one of the co-founders of GTI and ran the company for 5 years before retiring. And he's been on our board, and we've been able to institutionalize his knowledge of the industry. And so just think about that from a competitive perspective. Our ability to understand these properties, the facilities, the equipment, the balance sheets, the people, the licensing requirements really allowed us to create an underwriting approach that we felt would serve our investors well, but it also allowed us to, I think, create a reputation in the marketplace of being responsive to everybody's needs, being responsive to the unique nuances from property to property. And as I said today, we've got 32 properties, 12 states, 10 tenants. We own 17 dispensaries and 15 cultivation facilities. So I think it's that combined experience of knowing financial services, knowing commercial real estate, because of course this is a real estate business, but also understanding very well the cannabis sector has allowed us to build the business to where we have it today.
In terms of the interest rates, I brought this up earlier in the introduction. Later in 2024, I believe this was August, the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jay Powell, announced a rate cut. And, that was something that people had speculated would happen likely in this year. There was, talk of multiples, or people always take their bets on how many there will be. But the fact is, it was a 50 basis point cut from the Fed. And so talk a little about what this might mean right now and going forward for cannabis companies.
Yes, I'd say, so there's a couple of components to think about to set the stage for this conversation. One being, how does the rate on borrowing get arrived at? Number one is it starts with your risk-free rate. And then number two is you add on top of that your risk premium for the company that's borrowing or the fund that's borrowing. And so your risk-free rate is driven by the closest treasury rate. And so if you're borrowing at a 5-year facility, you're going to look to the 5-year treasury rate. Some facilities are floating rate. And so where the Fed action comes in is for anybody that has floating rate debt on their balance sheet. If the Fed cuts, as it has, 75 basis points so far this year, you have an immediate improvement in your cash flow because you've reduced your interest expense. But I'd say for most of the folks listening, they're probably focused on the public companies in the sector. Most of the public companies have fixed rate debt, so there is no immediate improvement. Where it could help them is when they come up for refinancing, that risk-free rate is lower. So as long as their risk premium hasn't changed, then the rate that they should refinance into should be lower. And so today, when we look at it, the question becomes, when some of these facilities come up, are the companies a better risk profile than they were when they closed their last? And so will they have a 75 basis point improvement roughly on their refinancing? Will it be more because they've improved in credit, or will it be less because maybe they're not as good as a credit? So there's a lot of dynamics that go into play, but it's undisputed, I think, a positive overall for the industry, because beyond that actual rate benefit, what you often find is in a lower rate environment, you find more investors seeking risk, and they go down the credit spectrum in order to get enhanced yield and make a higher return. And that just means that there could be more, and we'll have to see how this plays out in the coming months, but there could be more investor demand for borrowings out of the cannabis sector in order to grab that higher yield in that lower rate environment. It's often called a risk-on environment.
What I think when you bring that up is the notion of risk assessment and how these companies are going to be looked at. And you brought up an interesting point, which is to say that with the interest rate cuts, and if somebody's refinancing and then they get, their company gets looked at again to assess their risk level. What I want to ask you, Anthony, is this rescheduling proposition. And what I'm curious for your take, for somebody who's worked in finance and now in the cannabis space for a while, if we do get a rescheduling of cannabis under the Controlled Substances Act, if the administrative judge decides to move cannabis down to Schedule 3 from Schedule 1 where it currently sits, would that affect the risk assessment of these companies if they refinance?
Yes, in less of a direct way than you would think. So let's talk about the direct and the indirect way. The direct way is, as I think so much ink has been written over the last year about this, we would eliminate 280E and the applicability of 280E. So that reduces the tax liability and increases the net cash flow opportunity for each one of the companies in the industry. And for NewLake, we own our properties, we don't lend. So we own our properties. When we look across our tenant base, we estimate that our tenants will save approximately $500 million a year in tax payments by the elimination of 280. So that's significant. So every company in the sector just about gets a credit improvement because the free cash flow profile of that business improves over time. Now, when we think about today, not everybody's paying their federal taxes. So right. The actual cash flow impact to the business immediately isn't necessarily apparent because they weren't paying the full sum of their federal taxes anyway. But for sure, there is a credit improvement because the long-term prospects of these businesses all improve with that improvement in net cash flow. The indirect benefit comes from moving it to Schedule 3, we think brings in a marginal set of investors that have been sitting on the sidelines, afraid to step in when it continues to be Schedule 1. And we think this could be that marker, that mile marker, if you will, for some investors to say the federal government has finally weighed in. We see this flow of progress. We now finally see something happen at the federal level that's lasting and is moving in the right direction. And we think that could bring some investors off the sideline and increase the competition for the securities that are out there, both the debt and equity securities that are out there, which, as we all know, when you have increased competition, the price should go down.
Yeah, that does make sense. And I like that you put it that way, because it's similar to how I've been talking on the show a lot about the notion of rescheduling, and how even though so many people in the space are, dissatisfied with it, that it doesn't go far enough, that they would like full decriminalization. Hey, I'd love that too, but this rescheduling is a crucial step on the road to that, maybe. And as you just pointed out, Anthony, there are investors, speculative investors out there who have been waiting on the sidelines potentially for any kind of signal from the federal government one way or the other on cannabis. And to come out and say that they'll reschedule it, that's a pretty big signal to everybody as to which way they're really leaning. And I feel that way about consumers in general. There are still people who, whether they live in legal states or certainly if they don't, they're still operating under the old world prohibition, under the rules of cannabis established last century, which is they're still not giving at the time of day, or they're still operating on the DARE, rules of education that we got, which is to say they're just avoiding cannabis or maybe other drugs like that. And I think that rescheduling might bring some of those people into the fold, and it seems like your theory about investors holds the same water, I suppose, which is that there are just the signal of rescheduling is going to bring more and more people into this party, and some of those people will just be consumers, and some of them will be looking to invest in these businesses. Yeah.
Yes, but Don, let's also talk what I think could be the most important constituent that Schedule 3 brings into the fold is politicians. I think politicians at the state level will find it increasingly more difficult to stand in the way of a medical marijuana program. And I'm thinking North Carolina, I'm thinking Georgia to expand their program, I'm thinking Texas to expand their program. States like this where state legislators have been on the opposite side of this topic and saying quite simply, hey, this is Schedule 1 narcotic. What are we doing here? We can't go against the federal government. I think moving it to 3 and having the federal government acknowledge that there is some medical application to this will make it a lot easier for some of these state initiatives. And then on top of that, when you look at some of the recent, we're recording this here just after the election, you look at Nebraska, which is a fairly conservative state, just recently approved at the ballot box by 71%, with 71% support for a medical marijuana program.
Right.
I think that's significant. You take that plus Kentucky. Kentucky is launching next year their medical marijuana program, and their constituents in over 100 counties and cities had the opportunity to opt out of cannabis businesses in their jurisdiction. Not a single one of those initiatives failed. As we record this, it looks like all 106 will have passed. Again, that is a state that went for the Republicans by over 60%. So you have these more conservative states where you see the electorate speaking loudly about medical cannabis. And I think the politicians have to see that. They have to notice it. And if you move it to Schedule 3, I think it really could be that push to get more and more of the people who've been resistant to change for medical cannabis to get across that finish line.
Great point, Anthony, and I'm glad you brought that up, because Kentucky was a big winner on Election Day, Nebraska as well, and you brought up Texas as well, and there are a couple of localities there, several counties, the areas of Dallas, and I know that I read a couple of others. There was one, I believe, that rejected medical cannabis, but there were 3 areas of Texas, I'm pretty sure, that passed it along. And so to your point about the conservative states and these, even though it's not statewide, but these counties within those states voting and speaking loudly toward wanting medical cannabis, I absolutely think that's there. And it's an important point to make, because states like Kentucky, West Virginia, areas of Texas, and other states who don't have big-time legal cannabis programs, even medical ones, those are the states that have really been hit hard by the opioid crisis of this century. Those are the ones where people don't have a lot of great alternatives to prescribed opiates. And I think cannabis medically especially is sorely needed in those jurisdictions. And it is really, really important to kind of see voters in those states speak up to this and think that maybe rescheduling could be a nudge to those politicians to kind of get in line as well. So it is a very exciting time. And so we know that it's President-elect Donald Trump, and the Republicans not only took the White House, but they're going to have control of the Senate. It looks like the House of Representatives, as well as, a good portion of the courts in the country, not just the Supreme Court, but, the judges that have been installed over Trump's first term and likely some others that he'll replace during the second term. My question to you, Anthony, is what do you, in your estimation and from the financial side, rescheduling is its own thing because it's on the administrative timetable, but what do you see maybe coming out of this administration regarding cannabis? Because both Trump and Harris had pledged to move legalization a little bit closer in their own ways, albeit. And so from the finance side, do you think the Trump administration will be a good one for legal cannabis?
I think it's a tough call. First and foremost, nobody should be making decisions in their portfolio or in their businesses with the expectation of reform to occur. We never do it here in NewLake. I would never suggest anybody do it for their own business or portfolio. I'd say we've always said that we take the over on federal reform. It's mixed. Listen, you pointed out that both Harris and Trump during the campaign embraced cannabis reform as a part of their plank. Different approaches. For his part, President-elect Trump supported recreational cannabis in Florida for that ballot initiative. He supported the move to Schedule 3.
Right.
He supported states' rights. This is important because there is a proposed bill that's been introduced a number of times that, in essence, decriminalizes it at the cannabis at the federal level and leaves it to the states. There's a lot more around it, but that's the marquee statement that I'd make on it. And so what he's trying to do there is very consistent with other policies. Say, hey, you know what, federal government, let's get out of the way for this and let's move this to states and let them decide. And he also expressed his support for a cannabis banking bill, and that would be important to see. But we do have to understand the limitations of any presidential candidate to impact cannabis policy. You need congressional action, period, end of story. And with the Republicans getting 53 seats in the House, it's hard to see, especially as we're sitting here today and we're watching the leadership get decided of who's going to control the caucus for the Republicans and who's going to be Senate Majority Leader, and that leader will dictate the floor time and the agenda. So I don't see this being a top agenda item where the Republicans would want to take it up in the first, say, 100 days. But if there is really a reform agenda and there's an agenda to minimize federal involvement, and President Trump wants to see through on some of his campaign promises, you could see where maybe there would be some support to build. I think it's hard to take a look at any of the folks that are being talked about as leaders for the Senate majority and expect that they would get behind any sort of cannabis legislation. But you know what? Within the Safer Banking Act, there is a Section 10, which has to do all about regulatory control or reining in the regulatory authorities around banking. And the Republicans have been looking to get that type of language across the finish line for a couple of years. So if we get a real reform-minded, rein-in regulatory authority, you could see where maybe that's part of a bigger deal to get safe banking done. But I think it's going to be a tough haul. I can't say it's going to happen, and I certainly don't want to say it's off the table.
Yeah. I think that you made a lot of great nuanced points there, and really appreciate you unpacking the issues like you did, because that is really important stuff, especially the caution that you urged from people, which is to say, nobody should be, don't get your ducks in a row right now speculating that these changes are going to happen next year. Give it, as Anthony just pointed out, give it 100 days, give it 3 months, give it 6 months to see what the priorities of the administration are, and then you can kind of maybe try and plan the actions. But for right now, trying to imagine what the first 100 days of Trump's administration are going to look like, especially in terms of cannabis. I think that's like sports betting. It would be speculation at best at this point. But for anybody who's either has a cannabis business, who's looking to start one, who is, considering looking into some financing or maybe needing financial advice regarding their cannabis business or their prospects of one, how can they get in touch with NewLake Capital?
Our website is newlake.com, www.newlake.com. And you could reach us there, investor focused, and there's an investors page there as well, with all the information. We're a publicly traded company. NLCP is our ticker symbol.
Got it. So there you go. NewLake, NEWLAKE.com, and check out what they have going on there. Really important stuff, and you can get involved. Again, as Anthony said, publicly traded company. It's pretty exciting. So I will check out that NLCP ticker as well. Anthony Caniglio, President and CEO of NewLake Capital Partners. Thank you so much for stopping by and kind of breaking down the financial angle of these murky waters of legal cannabis for us.
Don, thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
And there you have it, listener. I want to thank one more time my guest, Anthony Caniglio of NewLake Capital Partners. As we talked about, you can head to that website or look for them on the ticker, because I think that their perspective is wonderful. Their expertise on the board is well taken and valuable. And also, as Anthony mentioned, this is the second largest real estate holder in cannabis in the United States. So if you're like me and you think that rescheduling is on the way, and as Anthony said, you don't want to invest banking on that, and I agree, you really don't want to. But I will just say, even if it doesn't happen, I think NewLake sounds like a good place that you might want to do some research on if you're looking for some place in cannabis that's a little bit safer and not as volatile to park some money. I don't give investment advice on the show, and, believe me, I'm not the guy to take advice from in that front anyway. But it's something to look into. And if you are in cannabis for business, if you've got your own idea, or you already have a business license and you're trying to get some real estate for it, this might be a company to talk to. So anyway, moving on to more news stories here. I mentioned to you earlier at the beginning that the largest study ever done on cannabis and brain function finds an impact on working memory. And this is out of the University of Colorado, the Anschutz Medical Campus. This is a really great university. I looked at the study itself. I scrolled down to the bottom where they report conflicts of interest, where their funding comes from, all of these things. And I will tell you, after doing the research, this does not seem to be a sketchy study whatsoever. So what I'm about to tell you, I'm telling you as somebody who loves cannabis, I'm telling you to take this seriously, because this is not one of those studies I've brought up on the show that has some question marks about who might be motivated, who was funding it, to find something that's anti-cannabis. I did not get that vibe at all from this. But they looked at over 1,000 cannabis users, some of them heavy users, some of them just recent ones who have not been heavy users, between the ages of 22 and 36. The study was published in JAMA earlier this week, the Journal of American Medicine. And the researchers found that 63% of heavy lifetime cannabis users exhibited reduced brain activity during a working memory task, while 68% of recent users also demonstrated a similar impact. Now, I've linked this down below, as I always do. Follow along, read it for yourself. But they go on, the decline in brain activity was associated with worse performance on working memory, the ability to retain and use information to perform tasks. For example, working memory allows a person to follow instructions they've just been given, or to mentally visualize and manipulate information, like solving a math problem. Now, as most of us stoners know, math is not cannabis friendly. Math is, barely friendly to non-enthusiasts. I mean, math can be, just plain old difficult, certainly annoying because of the mental effort you've got to make. This study shows cannabis, something we've all likely known, cannabis is not friendly to math problems. Now, you might be asking, what are considered heavy users? Well, the study considered heavy users to be young adults who've used cannabis more than 1,000 times over their lifetime, whereas using 10 to 999 times was considered a moderate user, and less than 10 times was considered a non-user. They used an MRI and then gave 7 cognitive tasks to complete. And they tested working memory, reward, emotion, language, motor skills, like tapping a finger to map brain control, relational assessment, and theory of mind. And they found a statistically significant effect on brain function. And the observed impact, they say, is very unlikely to be due to random chance. The effect was seen in both recent and lifetime users. The impact was less significant for other tasks. Now, during the working memory tasks, they found heavy cannabis use appeared to reduce brain activity in certain areas of the brain: the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex, and anterior insula. These regions of the brain are involved in important cognitive functions like decision-making, memory, attention, and emotional processing. Now, this is not all bad, though. And I brought this up because I also want to mention something else that was further down the study. One of the lead researchers, Joshua Gowan, a PhD, said their research also suggests that abstaining from cannabis use before doing a cognitive task could help to improve performance. And something else later on indicated that these studies did not show that this reduction in brain activity was permanent. The fact that abstinence shows improvement in the areas, just like anybody else, who studied this has usually indicated, the reduction in the working memory, all these areas that cannabis impacts in the brain, the effects are temporary. Even if you are a heavy user, even if you're a lifetime user, if you stop for a while, your brain can get back to, call it factory settings. I don't know. Nobody's used that term. I wouldn't necessarily, use that as a slogan for cannabis products. But, there were things that were not measured in this study that I would be interested to see the correlation to. I'm specifically thinking about people with ADHD who use cannabis to kind of self-medicate. Because I was talking about this with my wife, and honestly, I've never felt like my short-term working memory was that great. Long-term, it's fine. And I can recall important information when I need to. But even well before I ever smoked anything, during elementary school and high school, from what I can remember, I had short-term memory issues even then. So the idea that there's a causality here, I'm curious to see if these 1,000 users that they measured, how many of them would be diagnosable with ADHD. Now, I realize this is a specific thing, but again, there are a lot more people these days diagnosed with that. And I think a lot of those people end up self-medicating with cannabis. So my curiosity would be, is this really a causality or a correlation? But regardless of what they find, even though it might be discouraging to hear that, or maybe not. Maybe you already knew that and you're perfectly at peace with it. Personally, I would put myself in that camp. This doesn't really bother me, or it's not going to dissuade me from using cannabis. However, I've always said that, there are some tasks that cannabis is not great for. When I'm smoking, there are a few things that I won't, consume cannabis before doing. Doing my taxes or anything with math involved is usually one of them. I'm just not going to consume cannabis until that's done, because I want the free, unfettered ability to kind of focus on that. And that's just something that, even before reading these studies, that was something I had learned as a cannabis consumer, that it's just better to abstain depending on what the task is you're about to do. So anyway, I've linked that study below. You can check that out for yourself. Another story I wanted to share with you, this is from greenstate.com. This article also came out earlier this week. Anybody in Illinois is already familiar with class action lawsuits because we had so many of the lottery dispensary licenses tied up in courts for 2 years, allowing the multi-state operators like Cresco, like Green Thumb, like Verano to just, have a 2-year head start and basically just get a huge amount of the market share fueling their growth. Only now, in 2025 do we really start to see the increased competition starting to bring prices down and offer consumers more options, which is great. But it took over 2 years to get here. So anyway, weed companies have already seen legal problems brought by consumers, including a recent case brought by an alleged THC overdose. Now, I haven't read into that. That's something I'll talk about at another time. But now several brands in Illinois are being hit with class action suits centering around potency. Litigant Chad Alsip filed 2 potential class action lawsuits. One is against Acreage Holdings, and the other is against Wellness Group Farms, PHARMS LLC, better known as Arise. That's a brand you've likely heard of. Alsip argues the companies are violating Illinois law by marketing and selling vapes that exceed potency limits. Under the state's adult use laws, cannabis-infused products cannot exceed 100 milligrams of THC. However, cannabis concentrates like rosin and shatter are not subject to these rules. In the lawsuit, Alsip claims that vapes are actually cannabis-infused products because of how they're consumed, allegedly making them illegal. Similar class action suits were recently filed against the cannabis company Verano, Cresco Labs, and Progressive Treatment Solutions. In addition to vapes, the lawsuits also targeted Rick Simpson oil, the RSO, and an extremely potent form of hash oil typically used by cancer patients. Cresco representatives declined to comment. Requests for comment to the other defendants were unanswered at the time of publication. I'll also reach out to these people to see if they have anything to say about it. I'm not expecting much comment from them, and they'll just kind of let this litigation run its course. But the litigants seek an undisclosed sum alleging fraud, statutory violations, and other complaints. It's unclear if the lawsuits will proceed to trial or if any actual harm was done. However, if a judge sides with the defendants, it could impact the way products like vape carts are packaged, labeled, and sold here in Illinois and beyond. So that was something I thought it was worth bringing to your attention, and I'll certainly be keeping an eye on the developments from this. In the meantime, I've linked the article below. Check it out for yourself if you like. And finally, some good news to end this episode on. I have talked a lot on the show about how alcohol sales drop where cannabis is legalized. It's something that seems to be sort of a fact of life now based on how across the board those results have been. And based on new reports, it's not just alcohol sales that drop in states where it's legalized. Anxiety medication prescriptions also plummet in states with legal cannabis programs. This is from Cannabis.net. It's a blog that I enjoy reading from time to time. And they go on to lay out a lot of different, publications as well as sources for these observations, as well as various treatments for anxiety and how the prescriptions drop for those across different markets. But I'll just give you a little snapshot of what the article's talking about here. Recent studies have indicated a notable decrease in prescriptions for anti-anxiety meds, especially benzo, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, those SSRIs, and cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, as the author notes, research has suggested CBD may help alleviate anxiety symptoms without the side effects commonly associated with traditional anti-anxiety meds. Now, this article goes on for a while, and like I said, it breaks down different facets of this debate, of this sort of murky issue here. But as they conclude, the link between legal cannabis and decreased prescriptions for anxiety marks a significant development in mental health treatment paradigms. More patients are turning to cannabis as an alternative therapy. Pharmaceutical companies are going to have to adapt to this changing landscape by reevaluating their strategies and investing in research related to cannabinoid-based treatments. For patients grappling with anxiety disorders, the shift could mean a new era of treatment options, which might prioritize safety, efficacy, and individual preferences. But it also means there has to be an ongoing dialogue among healthcare providers about the best approaches to integrate cannabis into mental health care while ensuring patient safety. So I've linked that article below along with the others in the description notes. You can take a look for yourself as the author there on Cannabis.net, who is listed as 420 Bills, posted on this Monday, January 27th. You can see kind of the different breakdown of how that relates to anybody who does have an anxiety medication prescription, anti-anxiety. Nobody's hopefully getting prescribed anxiety. That would seem to defeat the purpose. But so anyway, I thought all those stories were worth bringing to your attention, but I think
that's enough.
Yes, as Snoop just said,
That's enough.
That's enough news. We don't need any more of that. And now
I'm getting high on reefer.
No, not yet, Niles. I still have 2 days to go. I am very close to that, and I'm very, very much looking forward to it. I am on the edge of my seat, as you may or may not be able to tell. But what it is time for now, as I like to do at the end of these episodes, to kind of zen us out a little bit on the outro and bring us all to a little space of centeredness and more mindfulness. It's time for this week's High Haiku by my friend Reg Kiefer. Take it away. Oh, God. So good. Endless thirst. Mind screams. Stone by stone, the summit nears. Cool rain greets the strong. Whoa. That was this week's High Haiku. Yes, it was. Thank you, Reg. The theme there that I wrote had to do with the arduous task of getting through dry January and the sweet, sweet reward of it being over, which, as I've said a few times, is inching ever closer. I can see the finish line right now, and I am so looking forward to this weekend. If you've been on this train with me, congratulations to you as well. We're almost through it, and the benefit, the beauty of resetting tolerance is just how much you feel closer to that original high of the first time. You'll never be able to get that first high back. I think everybody who uses anything knows that. The tragedy of addiction is that people are often chasing the first high that they got when they try a new substance. But there's no way to replace that novelty in your system. But what you can do is take a tea break, lower your tolerance to near zero, and then return to that substance that you enjoy. I know tolerance breaks aren't for everybody, and I'm not saying, just like cannabis, I'm not saying that it might be right for you or it isn't. But for me, I find that this is a way that allows me to keep cannabis as a part of my life without buying and going through too much product and not feeling the way I want to feel. I have actually, as difficult as it is, I have come to really enjoy and even look forward to this reset that I do every year. And there will be other tea breaks that I take throughout this year and my future. And if you're interested in taking them along with me, keep it tuned here. I will share with you any kinds of tips and tricks that I find to help get through them. I've already shared several of those with you, and I hope that they helped you in some way. And even if you're not stopping cannabis, doing things like exercising, meditating, journaling, combining herbal tea, adding that to your kind of well-being basket, I think all of that stuff is ultimately a net positive, as I do believe cannabis is for me and for a lot of us out here on this planet Earth. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. Like I said, if you did, make sure to leave a rating or review on whichever platform you're listening to this on. Leave a comment, hit the text link in the description notes. Let me know what you thought. Give me a heads up on some products you think are worth trying out wherever you're located. I don't care if it's in Illinois, if it's in California, New Mexico, Canada, Germany. Wherever you are, tell me what you've been trying. Tell me what you think about it. You can also hit the show up on social media. And I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but I have started doing something you might be interested in. If you do like what I'm doing here and you really enjoy hearing this episode and you'd like to hear it earlier in the week, You can now do that by going to Patreon, go down to the description notes and click the support the show link, become a Patreon subscriber. You will get early access to this show every single week. For everybody else, this show comes out Fridays. But for you as a patron, you will get to hear this show on Thursday every single week. It's also ad-free and uncensored. So if any of that sounds appealing to you, hit that support the show link in the description notes and become a Patreon subscriber. In the meantime, reach out to those you love. Have a fabulous weekend. If you're like me and you're putting dry January in the rear view, hats off to you for making it through, and let's make this weekend a good one. And we'll talk on the other side next week on the Cannabis Man Podcast. Bye-bye. Cannabis Man is 100% originally crafted by myself, Don Kleppen. Original theme music written and composed by Yusu Kim, aka Good Son.